So before I really go over the build guide, I just want to go over some tips that might help real quick because this build does a lot of shifting. So what you're going to want to do is you want to go to settings and you're going to go to controls. And the first thing you want to do is you want to unclick this box right here. What this does is it makes it so that your move button and your interact button and your basic skill button are all different buttons now, right? Then once you do that, whatever keybind you're going to put maul on, if you follow this build, right, you're going to put it to where it says hold position, right? And so when you do that, it's going to make it so that you don't need to hold shift to be able to stand in place and swing your maul. Okay, now that we got that out the way, there's a couple things I want to show you, right? Because it's very, very important for you to pay attention to as you're playing if you decide to play this build, right? For starters, we have two abilities that require us to shift, right? It is quick shift, and that's where we get this increased damage. And then it is also our key passive, which we get a 50 times multi whenever we've been in werebear for 2 seconds, and it lasts for 15 seconds, right? Now, you may be thinking, well, it's going to be a little clunky for you to keep this 15 seconds up because you can attack, and then you got to swap to werebear. But that's actually not the case. So if you pay attention to the timer here, so one of the timings that I know it's a little bit past half. Like as soon as it gets past that arrow, you're going to spam maul. And I'm going to show you real quick. So look, I'm going to spam my tornadoes, right? I'm spamming. And then right when it gets to half, I'm going to quickly, see that? I just clicked one time and then now it's back. And I can do it again. I'm going to wait and I'm going to click, boom, and it resets again without you having to be in werebear for 2 seconds. It's like, I think it's like every 2 seconds or something like that. It's not just the halfway point. As you can see there, I did it again. It's like it's these weird timings. I mean, you can just go in here and figure out what it is. The reason why that's important is because it's gonna make it so that when you're doing your bossing against the pit, you don't have to stop attacking and then go into werebear. And also, it's important because you have a lot of buffs from being in werebear that give you damage reduction. So naturally, every about 3 seconds, you just want to hit maul one time while you're fighting, and then that will give you most of your damage reduction. And usually that will just reset the passive on its own without you having to worry about it. So that's just one quick thing I wanted to talk about real quick before I really go into the build guide. So the biggest flaw with this build is going to be resource generation. But once you get these 3 certain things, you won't have those problems, right? Especially with this build, I have no resource problems at all, right? So this is the first thing. You need Tempest Roar. Now you might be asking, why do you need Tempest Roar? Because whenever you cast Tornado, Tempest Roar turns Tornado into a werewolf skill, so you'll turn into a werewolf. And that is extremely important because on this Lust for Carnage board, critical strikes with werewolf skills restore 2 spirit. This is huge right here, so I don't recommend you start this build until you get Tempest Roar. So now the other 2 things that I highly, highly recommend you do is you make sure you have a staff that has a resource cost reduction on it, and then you make sure that you have rings and an amulet with resource cost reduction. And then the last thing, you're going to want to have a good amount of crit chance, right? Because the more you crit, like I said, with this Lust for Carnage, the more you crit, the more spirit you're getting back. Eventually, you'll get to a point where you won't even need Energize. Right now, I don't run Energize, but I base this planner based on what I think would be comfortable for most people. So, for example, I use Bolster for Fortify. And I recommend once you start pushing higher pits and your resource problems are gone, I recommend you switch to Bolster. But for now, I think most people will like Energize. And then also on the skill tree here, for Bloodhowl, I put this in innate Bloodhowl for the 20 spirit, but I use the attack speed because again, I don't have spirit issues. But if you are having spirit issues, these are 2 things you can do to help out with that. Right. All right. So now that we've talked about Tempest Roar, the next thing you're going to want is a chest with max life, willpower, and spirit per second. Spirit per second is the most important stat here. Try to hit this at least twice. If you can get lucky and hit it 3 times, that's perfect. And if you can get a greater affix on any of these things, hopefully you get it on spirit per second, right? The 2 tempering perks you're going to want are Immobilize and Total Armor. Now let's just talk about this real quick. So for most of these pieces, I recommend you just get Immobilize and Chance to Stun. And the reason being is you have only 1 perk on here where you get a benefit from that, and that is Natural Disaster. So your storm skills deal 12 times increased damage to enemies that are stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. So you could get like chance to freeze, chance to slow, but you don't get any bonuses from that, right? Which is why I think you should get immobilized or stunned. But with that being said, do not mess up your item trying to force immobilize or stun, because you have other ways that you can do it, right? So don't force it. Just get it on at least one piece of gear and you'll be fine. Now, the total armor thing here, I recommend you get this because if you do not get total armor here, for you to hit armor cap, it requires you to have perfect rolled armor and perfect rolled armor tempering. And so, as you can see here, you're at armor cap, but you have to remember that is because this item is masterwork 12 out of 12. So if I bring it down when you first get the item, you will not be at armor cap. The aspect we use here is the vigorous aspect. This just gives us damage reduction while we're a werewolf. On the gloves, you're going to want attack speed, crit strike chance, ranks 2 tornado. The 2 temperings you're going to want are damage to close and stun. And the aspect we're going to use is the accelerating aspect. I have not been able to find a pair of gloves with these 3 stats, especially with ranks to tornado, let alone a greater affix ranks to tornado. So if you're like me and you can't find it, you can do core skills. You'll miss 1 point out of it, but it's better than nothing. That's what I have right now. I have core skills. I don't have tornado. So that is an option there. And on the legs, you're going to want armor, willpower, and max life. The 2 tempers you're going to want are immobilized and total armor. And the aspect we're using here is the aspect of might, and this gives us 20% damage reduction for 7 seconds whenever we cast a basic skill. Okay, so now this is another quick thing to note right here on these boots, right? If you really want to push high level pits, like past 120, and you're going to use regular boots and not boots like Wild Heart Hunger, I highly recommend you get this perk right here. And the reason why I say that is because we use Metamorphosis, this is our only form of Unstoppable. The problem is your evade charges, they have a higher cooldown, right? Now what that means is when enemies start to take a while to die and they start doing all those moves that CC you, having 3 evade charges, you will run out of evades, which is your unstoppable, very quickly. Right now, I have the 3 max evade charges, and as soon as I hit 120, I really started noticing me running out of unstoppable, and it also slows you down at the boss. Once you get this build to a certain point, you'll be tanky enough where you can tank all the attacks, but you want to be unstoppable for some of them so that way they don't knock you back. So I would recommend you look for boots with this. 3 stats you're going to want are willpower, movement speed, and spirit per second. You want to make sure you hit this as many times as you can. The 2 tempers you're going to want are stun, and we're just going to call this digit I grade because I don't know how to pronounce that. So we're just going to call it digit I grade, right? You're going to want that. On the staff, you're going to want willpower, max life, resource cost reduction. The 2 tempers are transfer tornadoes to cast twice and damage to close. The aspect we're using here is the shepherd's aspect, and I know it's kind of lame that you have to use 3 pets and they don't actually do anything, but this is the way they want us to play for Druid, unfortunately. Now, this is very important for your masterworking. You want to hit this as many times as you can. Obviously, hitting 3 is very difficult for most people, so try your best to hit 2 at least, right? 2 at least. 3 if you're lucky, 2 at least. Now, with this amulet probably doesn't exist for most people. Getting ranks to anything on amulet is very hard to find. So that is why I recommend, just like how I said on the Blizzard sorcerer that I made, always with your obols, only buy amulets. Don't buy anything else in the game. Everything else in the game you will drop, but amulets are the only thing that you need ranks on, and it's very hard to find, especially 2. But with that being said, if you can't find one with this, then go attack speed, right? And then if you can't find something with envenom, just go willpower, right? Just go willpower. That's what I would say. I would say let this be your starting amulet, and then if you get lucky and you find one of those things, just go ahead and get those with a crit strike chance, right? The aspect for the amulet, you're going to want the unsatiated aspect. Now, I want to note quickly, it says after killing an enemy with Shred, you gain 20 spirit. That doesn't do anything for us. That doesn't work. But the second half of this skill, the second half of this aspect does work for us. And it reads, your werewolf skills deal 52 times increased damage when cast above 50 spirit. Once you have eliminated that resource issue, and you have no more resource problems, you will always cast a tornado above 50 spirit as long as it's hitting somebody. And so this will be up almost 100% of the time. This is better than retaliation right now. For the rings, you're going to want the same perks and the same tempers on both. You're going to want willpower, first strike chance, attack speed, damage to close, and resource cost reduction. And for both of these, you want to try to hit that damage to close temper as much as you can. The aspect here we're using is the Storm Chasers aspect. This makes it so that your tornadoes have a chance to seek up to 3 targets. So this is huge. And the last aspect we're using is the Stampede aspect. And all this is doing is just giving us 1 extra pet. So we get 3 extra pets. And then that gives us 60 times increased damage. So this is huge here. And now let's just quickly go over the skill tree. So you're going to go 1 point into Maul, 1 point into Enhanced Maul. So again, Maul has a lot of purposes here. And one of the main purposes is every time you hit a Maul, you'll fortify for 8% of your max life. 3 points into Wild Impulses, Heart of the Wild. 5 points into Tornado, Enhanced Tornado, Raging Tornado. 1 point into Predatory Instincts. 1 point into Digit I grade. And then another thing real quick, whenever you're like speed farming, you can just take 2 points out of here and just put it in here. That way you get as close to the max movement speed as you can get. But for like pits and stuff, you don't really need movement speed. So just put your 3 points into Iron Fur here. And what this does is you get 9% damage reduction while in werebear form. And it lasts for 3 seconds after you exit it. And so like I said with Maul, you know, it plays a big role because 1, it gives us Fortify. And then another 2, it gives us 9% damage reduction. Next thing, you're going to want 3 points into Ancestral Fortitude, 3 points into Vigilance. You're going to want Blood Howl, Enhanced Blood Howl, and then depending on your resource issues, you're going to either go Innate or you're going to go Preserving. One quick thing, the reason why we go Ancestral Fortitude here is because it gives us 15% increase non-physical resistances. And if you look right here, all of our physical resistances are capped except for these 3 right here. But this planner does not account for the 15% you get here. So you will be resistance capped as long as you have the 3 points into here. Just a heads up. You're going to put 1 point into Wolves, 1 point into Poison Creeper. You're going to put 1 point into Ravens, Enhanced Ravens, Brutal Ravens, and this just gives us extra Ravens, which gives us extra damage. Put 1 point into Neurotoxin, 3 points into Envenom, 1 point into Toxic Claws, 3 points into Defiance, 3 points into Natural Disaster, 3 points into Circle of Life, and 3 points into Resonance. So when we shift, we get up to 48 times increased damage. And with Heightened Senses, it gives you 6% damage reduction after you shift into a werebear, and then 6% movement speed. And if you have both of those active, you get double. So you'll get 12% damage reduction and 12% movement speed, and it lasts for 6 seconds while both of these are doubled, right? And so, again, Maul is important because Fortify, 9% damage reduction, and then 12% right here when you have both bonuses, which you'll always have. So you get 21% damage reduction from swiping with Maul, which is why it's very important to always do those swipes. And on top of that, we have the Aspect of Might, which gives us 20% damage reduction. So Maul by itself is accounting for 40% of our damage reduction. So that's really important there. And then our key passive is Bestial Rampage. So every time you spam tornadoes, you'll always have this 30% attack speed. And then as you're doing that little swipe method I showed you in the opening clip, you'll get this 50 times increased damage without you really having to stay in werebear form. Okay, now we go over to Paragon. So your starting board, you're going Territorial. The reason why we go Territorial is because we want that damage to close. And the reason why we want damage to close, and it's also the reason why we put it on all of our gear, it's because this Thunderstruck board gives us increased damage by our damage to close and our damage to distant. And so right now our bonus is sitting at 185%. Then you're going to move up to Heightened Malice. And you're going to go put Outmatch here. The reason why we put Outmatch here is because we get bonus damage reduction from poison enemies. And enemies will always be poisoned because we pick up the Toxic Claws perk here. And this makes it so that whenever we critically strike with werewolf skills, they do poison damage. So every enemy that you hit will be poisoned. And then also Outmatch gives us 16 times increased physical damage to non-elites and bosses. Then we have Constricting Tendrils, and we go Fang and Claw. Fang and Claw, while in werewolf form, we get 12 times increased damage to close enemies, and it also gives us an extra 9% max life. Then you're going to move up to the Thunderstruck board, and you're going to put Spirit. Every time we critically strike, we get up to 12 times increased damage. Then you're going to move over to Ancestral Guidance. And you're going to put Earth and Sky here. Earth and Sky gets put here because it's going to help us hit that resistance cap. And what it does is nature magic skills deal 10 times increased damage to crowd control or vulnerable enemies. Then you're going to go to Inner Beast. You're going to pick up the Inner Beast node. So what the Inner Beast node does, every time we shapeshift, it reduces our spirit cost up to 45%. And then lastly, you're going to go Lust for Carnage. And you're going to put Werewolf here. Werewolf just gives us extra damage reduction. That's all we really use this for. And then we make sure we take the Lust for Carnage node, so that way our critical strikes restore 2 spirit. And I think that's about it. And like I always say, I hope this build guide was helpful to anyone. I hope seeing some gameplay alongside of me explaining everything was useful. And that's all I got. Peace.
I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet.